how are we going to move forward in these kind of projects if we do not have a consultation process that works with Indigenous communities? It's a terrible day.
Tonight, opposition MPs continue to pound the Liberal government to find out what they're going to do about the stalled Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project.
Our pipes used to be embedded in permafrost. The permafrost has sunk down deeper, so our pipes heave and break now.
With the reservoir in Iqaluit running low, people in the city worry about how they're going to get their drinking water.
It's best to address the issue that is not okay, that is not acceptable in any environment, and it's not acceptable behavior in society, period.
And a First Nation in Nova Scotia wants no racism at kids' hockey games, and they're putting up signs to stop it. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. For the second time this week, the opposition MPs wanted answers from the federal government on what it plans to do with the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. Today, two motions were put at the Standing Committee on Indigenous Affairs. It comes in the aftermath of the court decision that ruled Ottawa hadn't consulted properly on the project. But as Todd Lamoran reports, the result was the same as on Tuesday.
No. Mr. Duran?
No.
Mr. McKinnon? Mr. Ira?
No.
Mr. Lauzon?
No.
And with that, a Conservative motion to study the federal government's purchase and expansion of Trans Mountain and have the Ministers of Finance and Natural Resources testify before it was defeated.
I am so angry. I am so disappointed. The Prime Minister promised that parliamentarians were there to hold the government to account. He is running from account.
During the meeting, McLeod accused the Prime Minister of failing to deliver on the promise of economic development.
43 First Nations in Alberta and in my home of British Columbia have waited for the Prime Minister to ensure the benefit agreements that they painstakingly negotiated with Trans Mountain come to fruition.
The loss of jobs through a failure to adequately consult was the Conservatives' MP's main theme.
Since that decision, a little over a week ago, I would like to point out that Crescent Point Energy has slashed 17% of their workforce, including many Indigenous workers.
What we want to hear from the government is what is their plans. We heard clearly that the court has made a decision, but we also know that there are many First Nations across this country who are redoing budgets as we speak.
NDP MP Rachel Blaney also brought forth a similar motion, but with the emphasis on studying Ottawa's fulfillment of the duty to consult. It was defeated by the Liberals and Conservatives.
So here we are again in the same place. Canadians deserve better. Indigenous communities deserve better. How are we going to move forward in these kind of projects if we do not have a consultation process that works with Indigenous communities? It's a terrible day.
Blaney was also disappointed the Liberals said virtually nothing during the meeting.
First of all, before I start, how sad I am to hear no response from the other side of the table. This is an incredibly meaningful discussion, and I certainly hope to hear some response soon.
My colleagues felt this is not the appropriate venue and time to discuss these things. We are currently in the appeal period, and the government is exploring all options.
Miller added the government will look at the court case carefully and come up with a strategy. He didn't say if that means appealing the decision. Todd Lamoran, APTN National News, Ottawa.
There's yet another Northern Manitoba First Nation coming forward with racism and sex abuse allegations leveled at Manitoba Hydro projects. And York Factory Chief Leroy Constant is demanding an inquiry to get to the bottom of it. A report released last month by the province's Clean Environment Commission outlined abuses that started decades ago. Since the report, a steady stream of communities have been coming forward, saying these abuses continue today at worker camps located near First Nations. In addition to discrimination against Indigenous workers and racial slurs, the report documents sex assaults.
Our women in particular have been subject to ongoing trauma. The issues are wide-ranging since the late 1950s. And we struggle to have them heard and addressed even today. Racism, discrimination, harassment, and sexual violence continue today in the current Kiosk project.
Our Indigenous women have been enduring this kind of behavior from people at the projects for decades. It's very important. We need to make sure that all our employers are safe out there, but specifically our Indigenous women. They can't continue to be sexually exploited as they have been.
The Government of Canada has announced an investment of $100 million over the next 5 years for the construction of the Norway House Cree Nation Health Centre of Excellence. The health facility will provide emergency inpatient diagnostic community-based programs and will service the 8,000 residents of Norway House Cree Nation and the surrounding region. This new facility will replace the existing Norway House Hospital. Meanwhile, a new way of delivering health care is anticipated following an announcement by the Minister of Indigenous Services. On her whirlwind tour in Manitoba, Jane Philpott announced $68 million to support First Nations-led changes to the design and delivery of health services. Funding will be spread throughout 3 provinces, with Manitoba getting the bulk, $42 million over 3 years.
We are seeing now across the country that communities are wanting to see this kind of transformation. Even just a few minutes ago, as the Grand Chief and I met with some of his chiefs, we heard from them that they want to deliver care in communities. It's very costly and not always in the patient's best interest for them to always be having to travel outside of their communities, sometimes from very remote places, to be able to get care. And the kind of support that's being offered today will allow increasing care to be delivered closer to communities. And
we have a plan on how we can distribute the funding. So a part of that will be having more facilities that will look after our people, and more facilities that will have physicians in place to serve our people better.
One of the country's oldest, largest, and most embattled friendship centers is facing new trouble. A group of grandmothers, including a board member, are organizing an overthrow. Center's funding has been suspended, and as Melissa Ridgen tells us, on top of it all, they're also in hot water with the American Indian movement.
This is what's become of the Winnipeg Indian and Métis Friendship Center. Programs used by youth and elders, bingos, even a much-needed food bank had this place buzzing every day. 7,000 people a month use the center. Now you find this. Locked doors.
Right now it's in chaos. The doors are locked, and it's very sad because the same situation that took place a year ago has taken place again, and it's the same people that have been running it and running it into the ground.
The Manitoba Association of Friendship Centers pulled the pin on funding this spring when the IMFC stopped reporting its financials. It's the second time and second administration under fire for lack of accounting. Lisa Strong supported the current regime in an election a year ago.
It's all been nepotism and corruption, and there's been theft going on in there rampant.
Now she's part of a group looking to take the center back. She says even the center's elders have abandoned the IMFC until a new board comes in.
They felt threatened. Right. So, and they didn't like the atmosphere.
Norm Lajmodier was elected president of the board last year. He appointed himself executive director, and he's part of a group that claims to be AIM Canada. They were elected on the promise of getting the centre back on the straight and narrow while serving the community. Over the course of a year, they've even ruffled feathers south of the border, with the leader of the American Indian movement himself, Clyde Belcourt.
2 years ago, a group showed up from Canada, and that's all they did was come in and purchased a bunch of AIM sweaters, jackets, and T-shirts, and then they wanted to be endorsed and supported, and given permission to create a name program there, a name chapter. However, they never spent hardly a day in camp. They hung out downtown in Pipestone, Minnesota, all day and night at a McDonald's hamburger place. And then they went back to Canada and claimed that they were sanctioned by the American Indian movement, and that's not so.
Calls to the Winnipeg Indian and Métis Friendship Centre went unanswered, but the Manitoba Association of Friendship Centres says that they will support this grassroots effort for an AGM and a new election to be held, and they will be there to make sure that it's done by the books. In the meantime, Belcourt says he's sending a cease and desist letter to those who are proclaiming to be part of the American Indian movement.
And I want the community there to know that we don't go around like these guys are doing right now, wearing name jackets and name T-shirts and that, bullying the community. Yeah. They represent us. No, they don't represent us in any way. They've never been sanctioned, and because of what they've already done, we would never sanction them as a chapter of the American Indian movement.
Melissa Ridgen, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
The crystal meth epidemic has a community group literally on its toes. James Favel of the Bear Clan Patrol says his members have picked up more than 30,000 needles this year. That's up from 4,000 throughout all of last year.
We're taking 150 needles off the street just about every single night in every community that we work in, and that's alarming considering that we used to be able to start it in Dinaway, head to Main Street, and west again to Battery, over to Burroughs and back in one night. We're not getting half that distance now because we're spending so much time taking the needles up off the street.
Favel is calling for more resources to deal with the crisis. He says more medical and addictions treatment is needed, as well as safe consumption sites. Favel wants places handing out clean needles to also start handing out safe disposable containers, saying his volunteers would rather pick those up off the street as opposed to needles. Nearly 200 days after it was set up, a judge has ordered the Justice for Our Stolen Children camp in Regina to be vacated. The first teepee went up 6 months ago to protest racial injustice and the disproportionate number of Indigenous children in the child welfare system. The province had asked for an eviction order for the camp at Wascana Park. That was granted today. The judge also authorized police to arrest and remove any person violating the order to vacate the camp. Organizers of the camp are expected to react to the decision later this hour. People in Iqaluit are being asked to conserve water, sparking concerns of a shortage. Details on that coming up after the break.
I'm Ashley Branson. In southern Manitoba, we rely on a hydropower system located in the northern part of the province. But what we don't see is how hydro development has affected these First Nations. We speak to community members and they show us firsthand how it impacts their lives and their land. That's coming soon on APTN National News.
Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. Sunny and 21 for Halifax, a sunny high of 18 in Fredericton. Rain in Nain and a high of +8. Rain and 13 for Happy Valley, Goose Bay. 14 above under the sun in Quebec City. 19 in Montreal. 19 as well for Toronto. 18 in Sault Ste. Marie. 16 with the sun in Thunder Bay. 17 in showers in Sioux Lookout. Showers and 12 above for Puckatawagan. In Winnipeg, 22 with rain. 29 under the sun in Brandon. 25 in Regina, as well as Yorkton, where rain is possible. 11 in rain for Uranium City and Stony Rapids. Welcome back. Polar bears have killed 2 people in Nunavut this year, but a man out hunting with his 2 sons last weekend did what he had to protect his family. Isaiah Iqaluit of Arctic Bay said he was forced to shoot and kill a bear that came into his camp Sunday night. He said he was probably looking for whale blubber in his tent. He credits one of his dogs for waking him up in time for him to get his rifle. Iqaluit posted these pictures on his Facebook page. Still in the Arctic, for a few weeks now, Iqaluit residents have been asked to take showers instead of baths and to please not wash their cars. Why? The reservoir is low, and our Kent Driscoll set out to find out just how long this will last.
This is Lake Geraldine, Iqaluit's reservoir. It looks full, doesn't it? It isn't. A fear that there isn't enough water in this reservoir has the city of Iqaluit asking residents to reduce their water use. Why? We didn't get as much snow as we usually do, and an estimated 40% of water taken from here never makes it to the tap due to busted pipes.
So climate change is playing a big part in this. When it comes to the pipes themselves, our pipes used to be embedded in permafrost. The permafrost has sunk down deeper, so our pipes heave and break now.
And when those pipes break, we get scenes like this one. But this is the first year there's been water restrictions. Is this just a bad year? Or is this Iqaluit's new normal?
With the variability from year to year, this could happen again next year, or the dam could be overflowing. We just don't know at this point in time.
When Lake Geraldine was chosen as a reservoir, there were only 2,000 people living in Iqaluit. Now we have more than 7,000, and that number only goes up. There needs to be a long-term solution.
The city has grown substantially, so the existing reservoir doesn't necessarily meet our future needs. There's enough for right now.
For now, Iqaluit reduces water consumption and tries to save every drop of this reservoir for the tap. That isn't a long-term solution. It's barely meeting the status quo. Climate change and city growth will now have us questioning every spring, do we have enough water? And what happens if the answer is no? Kent Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Kids are always encouraged to participate in recreational events. It's where they learn sportsmanship, leadership, and have some fun. But as we've seen, racist comments are a problem. Now, one First Nation in Nova Scotia is not putting up with it anymore. Angel Moore tells us all about it.
Playing sports is supposed to be a safe place for kids to have fun. But this past year, hockey players experienced racist comments at a game in Quebec. In Nova Scotia, Chief Bob Glode of the Millbrook First Nation says he's heard this kind of racism in his community, and it's time to stop it.
When some of our kids in our community start to face it, the message started to come out and addressing that it's not okay for this type of activity to happen.
The racist attacks made the kids feel hurt and unwelcome. Councillor Colin Bernard knew they had to take action.
A parent had complained to him about a parent being racist in the stands.
He knew it was time to let everyone know that racism would not be tolerated.
So I asked our chief and council to kind of take the lead. Let's be the First Nation community to put signage in our own communities.
So the answer is these anti-racism signs. They're posted at all the recreation centers in the community. And Gordon Pictou, who is a physical activity leader, says the signs are helping.
We want to empower people to be able to stand up for each other and for what's right. And at the same time, we don't want people to have to do it by themselves.
The signs help the kids talk about their experience and what they can do if they are not being treated with respect. Glode says he wants to get the message outside of his community as well, so teens feel safe throughout all Nova Scotia.
It's best to address the issue that is not okay, that is not acceptable in any environment, and it's not acceptable behavior in society, period.
They hope the signs help everyone remember that playing sports is to bring communities together.
You know, at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. We're here to have a good time, developing good friendships that last a long time.
Angel Moore, APTN National News, Halifax.
Time for another quick break, but stick around. There's more to come. Here's the rest of Saturday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Rain and 12 in Grand Prairie and Peace River. Rain and 29 for Medicine Hat, 25 under the sun in Lethbridge. Rain and 17 for Victoria, Vancouver, and Campbell River. 7 and rain in Fort Nelson, 26 in Fort St. John. Sunny and 14 for Dawson and Mayo. Over to NWT, sunny and 10 in Norman Wells, Wrigley, and Fort Simpson. Snow and -1 for Sax Harbor. Snow and +4 for Pawatuck. To Nunavut, 11 and rain in Whale Cove and Chesterfield. 3 above and snow in Arctic Bay. 0 in Resolute. Welcome back. A local group is working to change the name of Dewdney Park. The space is named after political figure Edgar Dewdney, who has been criticized for his oppressive treatment of Indigenous peoples. As CTV's Kristen Achkate reports, the group says the park should instead be renamed to reflect the original landscape.
Edgar Dewdney is best known as British Columbia's 5th Lieutenant Governor, and he was instrumental in establishing Regina as the territorial capital. But there are also differing opinions of Dewdney.
Edgar Dewdney represents genocide.
Jolie Big Eagle Kakwetaway and Susan Duranje says Dewdney is viewed in a much darker light by the Indigenous community, as he was appointed as Indian Commissioner in 1879.
He brought in pass systems, he brought in starvation, he brought in the residential school system.
The two are part of the Buffalo People's Arts Institute, and they are just one group who wants to change the name of Dewdney Park to Buffalo Meadows Park. They are hosting this community barbecue to honor the buffalo.
We need a reflection of our history, and that's buffalo. That's the beginning. It's just a beginning.
The group is currently developing a proposal to the City of Regina for the name change and collecting letters of support and signatures for a petition.
A lot of what Dewdney did was what he didn't do. It was his inaction.
Russell Fayant has been an educator in Indigenous studies for 13 years at the University of Regina. He agrees with the name change and says Dewdney did not help both the Métis and Indigenous people in a time of need.
Early 1880s, the buffalo are disappearing. We have mass starvation that's occurring both in Métis and First Nations communities. We have the people organizing themselves as best they can to approach Dewdney for assistance. We see a lot of those requests ignored by Dewdney, and so the people start to take action, and of course what results from that is the Northwest Resistance.
In downtown Regina, people are split down the middle on the name change.
To me, it doesn't matter. Sometimes people shouldn't be so touchy.
The same original name, why should it be changed?
I think it's something that would be really good to do because we don't really do a lot to support our Indigenous people anymore.
Going back to the First Nations.
In a written statement to CTV, the City of Regina says they have not received a formal name change request for the park, but they are aware of growing dissension over names of city landmarks, and a report is before the Regina Planning Commission on how best to address it. Kristen Achkate, CTV News, Regina.
Well, that's your news for this Friday. A reminder that APTN National News Weekend moves to its new day and time. You can catch that now on Saturdays at 6 p.m. Eastern, starting tomorrow. And for news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great weekend.